the quiet town of Willow Creek, where everyone knew each other's names and secrets, the day Ethan vanished began like any other sunny summer afternoon, full of laughter and the innocent joy of family picnics spread out on the green, soft grass. Sarah stood watching her son with a heart full of love and the hopeful certainty that life was simple and nothing bad could ever touch them there. 4 years old, Ethan was chasing butterflies, his small hands reaching out as he giggled, the pure joy of childhood etched into every movement. The scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the warmth of the sun, the hum of cicadas providing a familiar soundtrack to the peaceful day. But in a blink, everything shifted. Sarah's eyes darted around the crowded park when she realized Ethan was no longer at her side. The butterflies she had been chasing were gone, and with them, her son had vanished like a whisper carried off by the wind. Panic flooded her veins as she screamed his name, her voice breaking with desperation that echoed across the picnic blankets and up into the canopy of trees. Friends and strangers alike stopped what they were doing, their faces shifting from joy to confusion and then to alarm. People scattered in every direction, calling for Ethan, searching under tables, behind bushes, and around the towering oak that stood sentinel in the park. The police were called, arriving with flashing lights and determined faces. But the day quickly darkened, the sun seeming to retreat behind ominous clouds as hope began to waver. Sarah's mind raced through every possible scenario, refusing to accept that her son could simply be gone, lost in the vastness of a place so familiar. Time crawled, hours stretching into an agonizing eternity, as search teams combed through the park and nearby woods, calling out for Ethan with no reply except the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of a bird. Neighbors joined the effort, their faces etched with concern and disbelief, sharing whispered prayers and promises to bring him home. The community, once bustling with carefree laughter, fell into a hushed solemnity, the weight of a sudden loss pressing down like a heavy fog. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the last toy Ethan had been holding that day. A small wooden car she had given him the morning before, now a fragile reminder of a life interrupted. The world seemed to close in around her, every moment saturated with fear, confusion, and an unbearable emptiness. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that swallowed the park whole, and Sarah found herself staring into the night sky, searching for answers in the cold, distant stars. Her heart ached with a grief that was raw and all-consuming, a pain that would echo in every corner of her life for years to come. The day Ethan vanished was not just the day she lost her son. It was the moment a part of her soul shattered, and the quiet town of Willow Creek was forever changed, its innocence fractured beneath the weight of an unspeakable tragedy. The unanswered questions lingered like ghosts, haunting the edges of every waking moment, leaving behind a silence that screamed louder than any cry. The days and weeks after Ethan's disappearance blurred together in a haze of frantic searches and desperate hope, as Sarah clung to the belief that her little boy was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. The local police mobilized quickly, organizing search parties that scoured every inch of the park, the nearby woods, and the winding streets of Willow Creek. But their efforts, no matter how thorough, yielded no trace of Ethan's tiny footprints or a single clue that could explain his sudden vanishing. The town buzzed with anxious whispers, and the media descended upon the community like a storm, their cameras and microphones probing for answers, capturing Sarah's tear-streaked face on every evening news broadcast. Posters bearing Ethan's smiling image were plastered on every lamppost, every grocery store window, their bright colors a stark contrast against the dull grays of grief settling over the town. False leads and tips poured in from well-meaning strangers and distant watchers, each one a cruel tease that pulled Sarah's heartstrings taut before snapping them in bitter disappointment. Families reported sightings of children matching Ethan's description, but every hopeful call ended with the same gut-wrenching conclusion: he was not there. The strain of unanswered questions weighed heavily on Sarah's shoulders as she navigated a labyrinth of grief and frustration, the walls closing in with every dead end and every silent phone line. Friends tried to offer comfort, but many words felt hollow in the face of such an immense loss. The police investigators, too, battled their own frustration, pushing through leads and interviews with dogged determination. Yet the trail grew colder with each passing day. The months stretched on, and the intensity of the search began to wane as the initial urgency gave way to a somber acceptance of the unknown. Sarah watched helplessly as the case shifted from front-page news to a footnote in the police blotter, the once bright hope dimming into a shadow that threatened to consume all light. The community that had once rallied around her family slowly returned to their routines, leaving Sarah in a solitude filled with echoes of what might have been. Nights became long and sleepless, haunted by the haunting silence where Ethan's laughter once filled the air. The investigation that had once held the promise of reunion dissolved into a cold case, a folder marked "Unsolved" gathering dust on a distant desk, its contents gathering cobwebs alongside memories too painful to revisit. Sarah's grief deepened with the weight of knowing that no answers would come, no explanations offered to soothe the aching void left by her son's disappearance. She grappled with the torment of what-ifs, the endless possibilities of danger or neglect that might have claimed Ethan's innocence and safety. In the quiet moments between days, she traced every detail she could recall: the sound of his small footsteps running away, the warmth of his hand in hers just moments before, the unfinished drawings he left on the kitchen table, clinging to fragments of a life that had been abruptly torn away. The cruel passage of time did not heal her wounds, but carved them deeper, the absence a persistent ache that refused to fade. Though the investigation went cold, Sarah's heart remained ablaze with love and unanswered questions, her soul forever tethered to the hope that someday, somehow, the truth would find its way back to her, and Ethan's story would not be lost in the silence. After the shock of Ethan's disappearance settled into a haunting stillness, Sarah's world seemed to freeze, caught in a relentless pause where time stretched endlessly and life lost its familiar rhythm. Days slipped by like shadows, heavy and slow, each one marked by the hollow absence of a child's laughter that once filled their home and hearts. The walls that had witnessed Ethan's innocent footsteps now echoed with silence, and the rooms felt unbearably empty, as if the house itself mourned alongside Sarah. Her marriage, once a partnership rooted in shared dreams and quiet comfort, strained under the weight of grief, the unspoken pain creating invisible chasms between her and her husband, Michael. Conversations that once flowed easily now stumbled awkwardly around the subject they both feared, their missing son, and soon, the distance between them grew like a widening river, their shared sorrow pulling them apart instead of binding them closer. Family gatherings became rare and uncomfortable, the presence of absent laughter casting a shadow over what should have been moments of connection and healing. Friends, unsure of how to navigate the fragile terrain of loss, drifted away, leaving Sarah with a solitude that felt both suffocating and endless. Yet amid the overwhelming darkness, Sarah's hope flickered faintly, a fragile ember hidden beneath layers of despair that refused to be fully extinguished. She clung to memories like lifelines, the way Ethan's small hand fit perfectly in hers, his bright eyes sparkling with curiosity, the warmth of his hugs that could chase away any fear. Every night she whispered his name into the darkness, a quiet prayer sent out to the void, hoping for a miracle, a sign, a fragment of news that might bring him home. She found herself wandering through old photographs and scattered toys, each one a bittersweet reminder of a life interrupted, a future stolen before it could unfold. Her friends who remained were few but steadfast, offering moments of comfort and understanding when words failed. Slowly, Sarah began to build a tentative routine, one measured in small steps, opening the curtains to let in morning light, preparing meals for a family now diminished, facing the world with a courage born from necessity. The seasons changed outside her window, each cycle marking another year passing with Ethan missing. Yet, inside Sarah's heart, the calendar was frozen on that day in 1990 when everything shifted. Nights were often the hardest, with memories swirling like ghosts in the quiet, and tears that came unbidden, the ache of loss never dulling. Yet, despite the relentless grief and the fractures in her relationships, Sarah refused to surrender completely to despair. There was a stubbornness within her, a quiet determination to keep Ethan's memory alive and to hold on to the hope that someday, some way, she would find him again. Her life was no longer the one she had planned or imagined, but in the pause, amid the broken pieces, she found a fragile strength. The days were marked by absence and longing, but also by a mother's unyielding love, a love that defied time, distance, and even the silence that had swallowed her son. Though the pain was constant and the future uncertain, Sarah carried on, her heart tethered to a hope that refused to fade into the shadows. Years had passed since the shattering day Ethan disappeared, and Sarah, now weathered by time and grief, moved through her life with a quiet resolve shaped by decades of unanswered questions and lingering sorrow. The small town of Willow Creek had changed around her. The familiar streets wore new faces, and buildings rose where open fields once stretched. But the ache within her remained steadfast, a constant companion in the ebb and flow of her days. One crisp autumn afternoon, drawn by a need she barely understood, Sarah found herself wandering into a local thrift store, a place filled with forgotten things and memories waiting to be rediscovered. The air was tinged with the scent of aged paper and musty fabric, and soft rays of sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting gentle shadows over the cluttered shelves. As she browsed aimlessly among stacks of old books, worn clothes, and faded photographs, a small, nondescript box caught her eye. Inside, nestled among other discarded relics of the past, was a solitary VHS tape, its label handwritten in a faded script that made her breath catch: Ethan Calloway, July 19th, 1990. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, the plastic case cool and weighty with the promise of something she had almost stopped hoping for. A swirl of emotions flooded her, a mixture of hesitation and cautious hope, as memories of that lost day surged to the surface, mingling with the bittersweet longing she had carried for so long. Questions raced through her mind. How had this tape come to be here, forgotten in a thrift store among the detritus of other people's lives? What secrets might it hold? Would it offer closure or reopen wounds better left to time? The moment stretched between her heartbeat and the ticking clock of possibility, a fragile thread connecting past to present. With a deep breath that steadied her shaking hands, Sarah brought the tape to the counter, exchanging a few crumpled bills for a chance at answers. The cashier's indifferent smile contrasted sharply with the storm of feelings swirling inside her, as if unaware of the significance of the small plastic box now clutched tightly in her grasp. Leaving the store, Sarah cradled the tape like a precious treasure, the fading label a symbol of the past, refusing to be erased. Her thoughts raced as she imagined the scene that the grainy footage might reveal: the laughter of a little boy, the warmth of a family gathering, or perhaps the shadow of something darker hidden in the background. The tape represented both hope and fear intertwined, a fragile vessel carrying memories that might heal or haunt. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden hues across the town she had known all her life, Sarah felt a spark of something she had not felt in years: possibility. The chance to finally uncover a truth that had eluded her for decades, to confront the mystery that had shaped her every waking moment. Though uncertainty lingered, Sarah's heart beat with renewed purpose, ready to face whatever the faded images on that tape might reveal, holding fast to the fragile hope that, at long last, her journey toward answers might truly begin. The worn VHS tape whirred softly as Sarah settled into the quiet sanctuary of her living room. The familiar hum of the old VCR mixing with the steady tick of the clock on the wall, marking the passage of time like a metronome for memories both treasured and painful. The screen flickered to life, casting a dim glow that danced across the room, illuminating dust motes that floated like tiny ghosts in the air, stirring the past from its long slumber. As the grainy footage began to play, Sarah's breath caught in her throat, the image revealing a sunlit backyard, alive with the soft murmur of family voices and the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by a warm summer breeze. Children ran and laughed, their carefree joy captured in imperfect pixels, and there, in the heart of the gathering, was Ethan, small, bright-eyed, and full of life, chasing after a butterfly with the unburdened innocence that once defined his everyday. The laughter, the smiles, the sense of belonging, everything felt achingly familiar yet distant, like a dream slipping through fingers that desperately longed to hold on. But as Sarah's eyes traced the scene, a subtle shift in the frame drew her attention to the background, where an indistinct figure stood partially obscured by the shadow of a large oak tree. The silhouette was vague, a blurred presence caught between light and dark, neither fully seen nor entirely hidden, its stillness contrasting sharply with the animated joy that surrounded it. A chill rippled through Sarah's spine as a wave of unease washed over her, the silent watcher in the background an unwelcome reminder that something unseen had lurked alongside her family's happiness, a shadow in the periphery of a day she had once thought perfect. She paused the tape, the frozen image flickering slightly as if resisting scrutiny, and leaned closer, searching for details that might explain the figure's identity or purpose. But the graininess of the footage obscured any clear answers, leaving only questions in its wake. Memories surged forward, fragments of conversations, unexplained glances, and whispers that had been buried beneath the layers of time and denial, suddenly feeling painfully relevant in the light of this discovery. The juxtaposition of innocence and suspicion carved a hollow in Sarah's heart, mixing hope and fear in a bitter brew she had not anticipated. She pressed play again, watching as the family mingled, unaware of the shadow watching from afar, its presence casting an unseen veil over a moment, frozen forever on tape. The quiet ticking of the clock returned as a solemn rhythm to accompany her thoughts, the weight of decades pressing heavily on her chest. This was not just a simple family recording. It was a puzzle piece resurrected from the past, a clue wrapped in nostalgia and fear, demanding that she look deeper, question what had been overlooked, and face the unsettling truth that the day Ethan disappeared might have been shadowed by more than chance. The room felt colder now, the comforting glow of the screen mingling with the chill of revelation, and Sarah knew that this tape was the key to unlocking a door she had feared to open for far too long. As the images played on, she steeled herself for the journey ahead, where hope and horror would entwine in the search for answers that could finally bring light to the shadows of her son's disappearance. Sarah sat across from Mark in the dim light of his cluttered office, the flickering glow of an old computer monitor casting long shadows that seemed to echo the unresolved mysteries hanging heavily between them. Mark, a seasoned private investigator with a weathered face that told stories of countless cold cases and late-night stakeouts, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he rewound the grainy VHS footage they had watched countless times before. The tape, once a simple relic from Sarah's past, had become a living puzzle, each frame a cryptic message waiting to be deciphered. Together, they scrutinized the images, their conversation a quiet exchange of theories and observations, weaving through moments frozen in time with the patience and precision of archaeologists uncovering buried truths. It was in the flicker of a shadow, the fleeting movement just beyond the joyous chaos of a family gathering, that Mark's experienced eye caught something Sarah had missed, a figure lingering too long at the edge of the frame, whose posture and intent suggested more than a casual observer. The man's presence was subtle yet unmistakable, a chilling spectre blending into the background like ink dissolving into water, unnoticed by the family but not by those who knew how to look. Mark pointed out how the figure's gaze seemed fixed not on the children playing, but on Ethan himself, as if measuring, waiting, and planning. The realization settled between them like a storm cloud ready to break, electrifying the room with a mix of dread and hope. The tape, once a source of bittersweet comfort, now offered a tantalizing lead, evidence that the disappearance might have been no accident, but a carefully orchestrated act by someone close enough to move unnoticed among the joyous crowd. Sarah felt a surge of emotions, fear for what the truth might reveal, anger at the betrayal implied, but above all, a fierce determination to follow this new trail wherever it might lead. Mark's voice broke the silence as he suggested cross-referencing the man's silhouette with local records from 1990, looking for anyone known to frequent the area or with a history that matched the dark implications of the footage. They discussed the possibilities of reaching out to former neighbors, digging through forgotten files, and interviewing anyone who might have glimpsed the figure or sensed something amiss that day. The quiet hum of the office, punctuated by the rhythmic clicking of a mouse and the occasional scribble of notes, became the backdrop to a plan taking shape, a careful, deliberate hunt for the shadow that had haunted Sarah's memories for so long. The weight of decades seemed to shift slightly in that moment, the cold case warming with the possibility of answers, of justice, and of a mother's hope rekindled. As they prepared to dive back into the archives and follow this fragile lead, Sarah felt a cautious optimism bloom amidst the grief, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could find a way through cracks of persistence and courage. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in many years, she was not alone in the search. Mark's steadfast presence was a beacon in the fog of uncertainty, guiding her toward the truth hidden in the grainy shadows of a faded VHS tape. Sarah and Mark returned to the familiar streets of Willow Creek, a town that had aged gracefully, yet bore the invisible scars of past tragedies etched into its quiet corners and weathered facades. The neighborhood where Ethan had once played, where his small footsteps had echoed through the sidewalks and front yards, now seemed both hauntingly unchanged and disturbingly different under the weight of decades. As they walked past the old houses with their peeling paint and overgrown gardens, memories stirred like shadows at dusk, moments frozen in time yet tinged with unease. They began knocking on doors, seeking out the faces that had once filled Sarah's world with warmth, and now carried the burden of secrets too long concealed. Neighbors who had known the Calloway family well at the time opened cautiously, their eyes reflecting a mix of sympathy and hesitation, as if the wounds from Ethan's disappearance were still raw beneath the surface. Some recounted ordinary memories of a boy with a bright smile and boundless energy, but as conversations deepened, whispers of odd happenings emerged. Strange visitors who appeared and vanished without explanation, unexplained noises in the night, and a man seen lingering near the park where Ethan was last seen. One elderly woman, her voice trembling, spoke of a cold presence she had felt that summer, a shadow that seemed out of place amid the laughter of children. Another recounted a heated argument between neighbors days before Ethan's disappearance, words sharp and full of menace that had unsettled the usually peaceful street. The stories wove a tapestry of quiet suspicion, small fractures in the community's veneer that had been ignored or forgotten in the rush of daily life. Mark took careful notes, his experienced mind piecing together patterns that suggested the surface calm of Willow Creek masked a turbulent undercurrent at the time of the tragedy. They spoke with family friends who admitted to seeing unfamiliar faces at gatherings, strangers who blended in just enough to avoid immediate notice, but left a lingering sense of discomfort. Some neighbors expressed guilt for not speaking up sooner, weighed down by the knowledge that their silence might have cost a child his safety. Sarah listened intently, the flood of recollections stirring both hope and heartache as new perspectives challenged the narrative she had held for so long. The town itself seemed to breathe with memories, the streets whispering secrets through the rustling leaves and faded paint. As dusk settled and the sky deepened into shades of purple and grey, Sarah and Mark found themselves standing near the old park, the site of Ethan's last known moments. The once vibrant playground was now silent, shadows stretching long across the worn benches and empty swings that creaked softly in the breeze. It was here that the fragments of the past converged, the whispered confessions and half-remembered fears coalescing into a clearer picture of a community that had looked away when vigilance was most needed. The journey through Willow Creek had unearthed more than forgotten memories. It had revealed the fragile threads of truth woven beneath decades of silence, and with every story shared, Sarah felt the weight of isolation lighten slightly, replaced by a growing resolve to uncover what had been hidden and bring long-awaited justice for Ethan. As Mark delved deeper into the faded shadows cast by the VHS tape's mysterious figure, a pattern began to emerge. One that connected the indistinct silhouette lurking behind the scenes to a local man who had vanished shortly after Ethan disappeared. A man whose name had quietly slipped through the cracks of Willow Creek's collective memory. The man, known as Carl Benson, was an enigma wrapped in rumors and half-truths, his reputation tainted by whispered accusations of violent outbursts and a life steeped in darkness that the townsfolk preferred to forget. Mark's investigation uncovered fragments of Carl's troubled past, a childhood marked by neglect and hardship, a string of petty crimes that escalated into more sinister undertakings, and a restless spirit who had become a fixture on the fringes of the community, both feared and avoided. The timing of Carl's disappearance, so close to the day Ethan was taken, cast a long and sinister shadow over the years of unanswered questions. Documents revealed that Carl had been involved in several disturbing incidents, including allegations of stalking and intimidation, though none had ever resulted in formal charges. His sudden vanishing had been as mysterious as Ethan's, a disappearance that had gone largely unexamined, quietly swallowed by the passage of time and the town's reluctance to confront uncomfortable truths. Mark sifted through old police records, newspaper clippings, and interviews with those who had crossed paths with Carl, piecing together a narrative that hinted at a dark link between the two cases. The VHS tape, once a simple family keepsake, now took on the weight of a hidden message, its grainy frames revealing a man who watched and waited, whose presence was neither accidental nor benign. Mark's findings stirred a renewed sense of urgency in Sarah, whose hope had flickered uncertainly for so long, now reignited by the possibility that the man in the shadows was not a ghost, but a living key to unlocking the mystery of her son's fate. The image of Carl Benson loomed larger with each revelation, a figure cloaked in menace and tragedy, whose silence had shrouded the truth for decades. Conversations with former acquaintances painted a portrait of a man haunted by demons, unpredictable and volatile, but also cunning enough to evade suspicion and disappear without a trace. The darkness of Carl's past was a stark contrast to the innocence of Ethan's childhood captured on the tape, a juxtaposition that deepened the sorrow and complexity of the case. Mark prepared to dig even deeper, aware that the path ahead was fraught with dangers both legal and personal, but driven by the conviction that justice demanded courage and persistence. For Sarah, the revelation of this hidden connection was both a painful reckoning and a beacon of possibility, a chance to confront the shadows that had haunted her for decades and finally bring light to the truth buried beneath layers of fear and silence. As the pieces fell into place, the long-buried secrets of Willow Creek began to unravel, weaving a tale of loss, betrayal, and the enduring fight for answers in a town forever changed by the disappearance of a little boy named Ethan. Sarah stood on the weathered porch of the old farmhouse, the setting sun casting long shadows across the cracked wooden boards beneath her feet, while the air hung thick with the scent of dried earth and fading summer blossoms. Across from her, Thomas Reed, a man once trusted as a family friend, but now draped in the quiet suspicion that had crept between them like a creeping fog, shifted uneasily, his eyes avoiding hers, as if the weight of unspoken truths pressed too heavily to bear. The years since Ethan's disappearance in 1990 had carved lines into both their faces and hearts, but none so deep as the ones forged by secrets that had festered in silence. Sarah's voice was steady, yet edged with the raw emotion she had fought so hard to contain over the decades, as she asked the questions that had haunted her nights and days, questions about what Thomas knew, what he had seen or heard in those desperate early days that no one else had dared to speak aloud. Thomas's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, the only sound was the soft rustling of wind through the dying leaves, a fragile soundtrack to a confrontation that felt both inevitable and terrifying. He finally spoke, his words measured but laden with the gravity of memories best left buried, revealing glimpses of shadows that lurked behind the warm smiles and community gatherings. A man who had lingered too long near the edges of their lives. Someone whose presence had been both unnoticed and unsettling. As the conversation unfolded, layers of old distrust and guilt peeled away, exposing fractures in the facade of friendship and revealing the painful truths that had been woven into the fabric of their shared past. Thomas admitted to being there the day Ethan vanished, standing just out of sight but unable to intervene, weighed down by fear and confusion, a silent witness to moments that replayed in his mind like a broken record. The tension in the air thickened as Sarah pressed further, uncovering inconsistencies in Thomas's story and the ways he had distanced himself from the community after that summer, disappearing into a haze of whispered rumors and unexplained absences. The confrontation was a delicate dance between accusation and the desperate need for answers, with every word exchanged carrying the heavy burden of years lost and trust betrayed. Sarah's heart pounded with a mixture of sorrow and determination, knowing that this reckoning was a necessary step toward unraveling the mystery that had consumed her life. The twilight deepened around them, and the farmhouse windows reflected flickers of light and shadow, mirroring the flickering hope and fear that battled within Sarah's chest. As the conversation reached a fragile pause, it was clear that the confrontation had cracked open a door that could not be closed, releasing a flood of memories and suspicions that would no longer be contained. Thomas's eyes met hers briefly, a flicker of remorse and resignation passing between them, acknowledging the unspoken truths that had long weighed upon them both. Sarah knew that this encounter was not the end, but the beginning of a more difficult journey, one that would force both of them to confront the darkest corners of their past and face the truths they had avoided for far too long. The night settled in around them like a heavy blanket, but within, Sarah burned a fierce resolve to pursue justice for Ethan, to uncover every hidden thread in the tapestry of lies, and to finally bring light to the shadows that had haunted her family since that fateful summer in 1990. As Sarah and Mark pushed deeper into the tangled web of Ethan's disappearance, their investigation uncovered a chilling truth that stretched far beyond the quiet streets of Willow Creek, a hidden trafficking ring that had operated with disturbing efficiency across the region during the early 1990s, weaving a dark undercurrent beneath the surface of everyday life that few had dared to acknowledge. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that Ethan's vanishing was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a grim pattern of abductions and disappearances that authorities had either overlooked or deliberately ignored, swept under the rug in a time when awareness and resources were scarce, and victims' voices were muffled by fear and silence. Documents seized from reluctant informants painted a harrowing picture of a network that preyed on vulnerable children, exploiting gaps in law enforcement and the innocence of small towns like Willow Creek to carry out their sinister trade. The ring's reach extended through shadowed corridors and whispered contacts, crossing state lines and international borders, its operations hidden in plain sight amid the bustle of everyday commerce and the quiet rhythms of rural life. Mark's tireless research brought to light old reports and cold files that hinted at connections between missing children cases from neighboring counties, cases that bore the same hallmarks of disappearance without trace, leaving families stranded in a limbo of grief and uncertainty. Sarah felt the weight of this revelation pressing down on her. The fragile hope she had clung to now mingled with a terrifying clarity about the forces that had torn her son from her arms. The faces of other families haunted her thoughts. Parents who had suffered in silence, their pain echoing her own, united by the shared horror of a system that had failed them. Conversations with former law enforcement officials and activists revealed a culture of complacency and fear, where corruption and intimidation had allowed the trafficking ring to flourish unchecked for years. The trail was littered with missed opportunities and buried evidence, a testament to the complexity and ruthlessness of those who profited from the suffering of innocent children. Sarah and Mark's discovery galvanized them to dig deeper, forging alliances with organizations dedicated to uncovering the truth and demanding justice for the forgotten. Each new piece of information was a step toward dismantling the web of lies and secrecy, a beacon of hope cutting through decades of darkness. Yet the path was fraught with danger as they found themselves navigating threats and warnings designed to silence their pursuit. Despite the risks, Sarah's resolve hardened, fueled by the faces of children who deserved to be found and stories that needed to be told. The quiet town of Willow Creek seemed to hold its breath, the past reaching out from the shadows to challenge the present and force a reckoning with a history that could no longer be hidden. As the network's layers peeled away, revealing the true scale of the horror beneath, Sarah understood that the fight for her son's memory was part of a larger battle, a fight to bring light to the darkest corners of humanity and to ensure that the voices of the missing would finally be heard. The weight of the investigation's revelations pressed heavily on Sarah's heart as she struggled to reconcile the horrifying possibility of what might have truly happened to Ethan, a truth so fractured and cruel that it threatened to shatter the fragile hope she had carried for decades. Memories she had long suppressed, tucked away like fragile glass shards hidden beneath layers of denial and grief, began to surface unbidden, painting a mosaic of pain and confusion that blurred the lines between past and present. In quiet moments, when the world around her faded into stillness, flashes of that summer day in 1990 flickered through her mind, the sound of Ethan's laughter mingling with the rustle of the park's leaves, the sudden silence when he was gone, and the frantic search that followed. She recalled a figure at the edge of her vision, a face she had tried to forget, and a chill that had lingered in her bones long after the sun had set. Nightmares invaded her sleep, each one a distorted reflection of reality, where shadows danced just beyond the reach of light, and answers remained just out of grasp. These recollections, once too painful to confront, now forced their way to the surface, demanding acknowledgement and forcing Sarah to face the rawness of her loss with renewed clarity. The fractured truth was a jagged puzzle she had been unwilling to assemble, each piece revealing more about the darkness that had swallowed her son and the community's silence that had allowed it to happen. She wrestled with feelings of anger toward those who had looked away, guilt for moments when she had doubted her own instincts, and sorrow for the innocence stolen not only from Ethan, but from countless others caught in the same cruel web. Flashbacks to conversations with neighbors, hushed warnings, and fleeting glances now gained new meaning, casting old memories in a sinister light that Sarah could no longer ignore. Her relationship with Michael strained further as the chasm between shared grief and divergent coping grew wider, the unspoken fractures between them threatening to crumble what little remained of their once solid foundation. Yet amid the turmoil, Sarah found herself clinging to a fragile strand of determination, a need to honor Ethan's memory by uncovering the full story, no matter how painful. She began to understand that healing would not come from ignoring the fractured truth, but from confronting it head-on, piece by jagged piece. The days blurred into nights as she pored over files and revisited conversations, piecing together a narrative that was at once terrifying and necessary. In the quiet spaces between moments of despair, Sarah discovered unexpected reservoirs of strength, her love for Ethan fueling a relentless pursuit of justice and closure. The shadows of the past no longer held dominion over her mind, but instead became a crucible in which her resolve was forged anew. She knew the path ahead would be fraught with pain and uncertainty, but also that she could no longer let fear or denial dictate her journey. The fractured truth, once a source of unbearable anguish, had become a beacon guiding Sarah through the darkness toward a future where silence was broken and answers were finally within reach. Sarah and Mark worked tirelessly to gather every scrap of evidence they could find, determined to push the cold case of Ethan's disappearance back into the harsh light of scrutiny after decades of silence and neglect, knowing that the truth had long been buried beneath layers of bureaucratic indifference and fear. They spent endless hours poring over old police files, each page yellowed with age and filled with faded ink that told stories half told, redacted, or deliberately obscured. The walls of Mark's office, cluttered with maps, photographs, and case notes pinned in haphazard patterns, bore witness to their relentless pursuit of justice, a visual testament to their refusal to let the case fade into oblivion. Their efforts were met with resistance from unexpected quarters. Some former officers, burdened by the passage of time or the weight of guilt, were hesitant to revisit the past, their memories clouded or their lips sealed by loyalty and fear. Reluctant witnesses emerged from the shadows, their voices shaky as they recalled fragments of conversations or fleeting glances, but often stopped short of revealing the full story, wary of stirring up old wounds or inviting danger. Sarah felt the sting of each refusal, the frustration of hitting brick walls that seemed constructed to protect secrets better left buried. Yet Mark's experience navigating such obstacles proved invaluable. He coaxed information out of silence with patience and persistence, piecing together a mosaic of testimonies that slowly chipped away at the fortress of denial surrounding the case. They reached out to advocacy groups and legal experts, building a coalition of support that lent their cause new weight and visibility. The community began to stir once more, whispers growing into voices demanding answers, and the media, sensing a renewed story of injustice and resilience, turned their attention back to Willow Creek. The case that had been relegated to a dusty file was suddenly alive again, the echoes of lost childhoods resonating through the corridors of power and public opinion. For Sarah, each breakthrough was a double-edged sword, bringing hope but also reopening wounds she had learned to carry quietly. The memories of Ethan's bright smile and the unbearable void left by his absence fueled her resolve, giving her strength to face the backlash and skepticism that accompanied their campaign. Legal obstacles and bureaucratic red tape slowed progress, but Sarah and Mark refused to be deterred, their partnership a beacon of tenacity in a landscape littered with despair. They held community meetings and press conferences, sharing their findings and urging action, transforming grief into collective determination. The fight for justice became more than a personal crusade. It was a call to confront a system that had failed not only Ethan but countless others, a demand for accountability and change. As the spotlight intensified, Sarah felt a stirring of something she had not experienced in years. A sense of agency, a belief that even in the face of overwhelming odds, truth and justice were worth the struggle. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges, but Sarah's heart burned with a fierce hope that this renewed fight might finally bring peace to her shattered world and honor the memory of her lost son. Advancements in forensic technology, once the stuff of distant hope, finally breathed new life into the case that had long been relegated to shadows, as Sarah and Mark watched with cautious optimism while experts meticulously analyzed the grainy VHS tape and other aged evidence collected over the years. These breakthroughs, born of innovation and relentless dedication, revealed details once thought impossible to uncover, casting sharp relief on faces and places previously blurred by time and neglect. The enhancement of images, the extraction of faint audio whispers, and the cross-referencing of data with modern databases began to unravel the tightly woven web of mystery that had enveloped Ethan's disappearance since 1990, transforming vague suspicions into tangible leads. Among the revelations was a name, a suspect whose involvement was previously unknown or deliberately concealed, surfacing from the depths of obscurity to stand at the center of a growing storm. The suspect, connected intimately to the trafficking ring that had operated unchecked during those dark years, was linked to the figure lurking in the background of the family footage, providing a critical connection that bridged the gap between suspicion and proof. This development sent ripples through the community of Willow Creek and beyond, reigniting public interest and placing renewed pressure on law enforcement to act decisively where previous attempts had faltered. Sarah felt the steady surge of hope mingled with the familiar pangs of fear and uncertainty. The possibility of justice finally arriving was tempered by the knowledge of the long, painful road that lay ahead. As authorities moved swiftly to investigate, they arrested the suspect, whose past was as tangled and shadowed as the crimes he was accused of, exposing a life lived on the fringes of society, marked by deception and cruelty. The arrest was both a victory and a solemn reminder of the suffering endured by Ethan and countless others ensnared in the trafficking network. Sarah found herself confronting a complex mix of emotions: relief that a measure of accountability was finally within reach, sorrow for the depths of human darkness revealed, and determination to see the process through to its conclusion. The courtroom battles that followed were intense and grueling, with prosecutors presenting the painstakingly gathered evidence, including the enhanced footage and corroborating testimonies that painted a damning picture of guilt. The defense mounted fierce opposition, attempting to dismantle the fragile threads of proof, but the weight of the new forensic findings proved overwhelming. Throughout the ordeal, Sarah's resilience shone, her voice unwavering as she spoke for Ethan and the other victims whose stories had been silenced for too long. The breakthrough marked a turning point, not just in the case, but in Sarah's journey from despair to empowerment, a testament to the enduring power of hope and justice. Though the scars of the past would never fully fade, the arrest of the suspect brought a measure of closure and set a precedent for uncovering truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. For Sarah, it was a step forward, a light cutting through the darkness, and a promise that her son's memory would no longer be overshadowed by silence and fear, but honored by the courage to confront and overcome the darkest of truths. The confession came slowly, like a cold wind sweeping through the quiet town of Willow Creek, stirring up long-buried memories and unspoken fears that had festered in the shadows since the early 1990s, when Ethan was taken from his family and the community's innocence was forever shattered. As the suspect's voice echoed in the sterile interrogation room, recounting chilling details of manipulation, deception, and cruelty that had ensnared not only Ethan but countless others, Sarah felt a tumultuous wave of emotions crash over her. Relief that the truth was finally unfolding, sorrow for the unimaginable suffering endured, and a burning rage at the depths of human darkness that had been allowed to fester unchecked for so long. The man's admissions painted a grim picture of a network built on fear and silence, where victims were traded like commodities and their stories erased by threats and complicity, leaving families like Sarah's grasping at fragments of hope amid a sea of despair. As news of the confession spread, the community grappled with the weight of its own history. forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that behind the idyllic facades and familiar faces lay a painful legacy of betrayal and loss. Conversations that had once been whispered in private now emerged into the open as neighbors, friends, and leaders began to reckon with their role, whether through action or inaction, in allowing such darkness to take root. The local churches and schools, pillars of the town's identity, faced scrutiny, and initiatives for healing and reform began to take shape amid the grief and anger. Sarah found herself at the center of this reckoning, her personal journey intertwined with the collective need for justice and closure. The confession reopened wounds that had never truly healed, and while it brought a measure of clarity, it also demanded that the community face the scars left by years of silence and denial. Support groups formed, offering a space for survivors and families to share their pain and resilience, while law enforcement agencies pledged renewed commitment to protect the vulnerable and prevent such tragedies from recurring. Sarah's own heart was a battlefield of emotions. The relief that justice was moving forward clashed with the sorrow for the innocents lost and the rage that such evil had thrived in their midst. Yet, through the turmoil, she discovered a wellspring of strength, a determination to transform grief into action and to ensure that Ethan's story would be a catalyst for change. The confession was not the end, but a painful beginning, a moment that shattered illusions and opened the door to truth and healing. As the community of Willow Creek slowly gathered the pieces of its fractured past, Sarah stood resolute, ready to face the challenges ahead and to carry forward the legacy of her son with courage and unwavering love. The aftermath was a complex landscape of pain and hope, mourning and rebuilding. But beneath it all lay the promise that from the darkest truths could emerge a future shaped by justice, remembrance, and the collective will to protect what remained sacred. Though Ethan's fate remained shrouded in painful uncertainty, with fragments of truth mingling uneasily alongside unanswered questions, Sarah found herself stepping into a new chapter of her life, defined not by despair, but by a fierce resolve to transform her loss into a force for change and compassion. The years since 1990 had carved deep grooves in her heart, yet they had also forged a strength that blossomed into advocacy, as she dedicated herself to raising awareness about missing children and the desperate need for communities to unite in vigilance and support. Sarah's days became filled with meetings, speaking engagements, and collaborations with organizations committed to shining a light into the darkest corners where silence had allowed countless children to disappear without a trace. She forged connections with families whose stories echoed her own, their shared grief becoming a powerful foundation for collective action and healing. Through workshops and campaigns, Sarah worked tirelessly to educate parents, schools, and law enforcement on the importance of early intervention and community vigilance, driven by the knowledge that every moment counted and every voice mattered in the fight against child exploitation and abduction. Her advocacy extended beyond Willow Creek, touching neighboring towns and eventually gaining national attention, inspiring others to join the cause and demand systemic changes in how missing children cases were handled. Amid this whirlwind of activity, Sarah still carried the quiet moments of reflection, times when she would stand at Ethan's empty place at the dinner table or wander through the park where he once played, the memories mingling with the hope that her work might spare another family the agony she had endured. Her relationships, once strained and fragile, found new ground as loved ones rallied around her mission, their shared purpose knitting them closer and providing a balm for old wounds. Though the ache of not knowing where Ethan was or what had become of him lingered like a shadow at the edges of her life, it no longer defined her. Instead, it fueled a passion that burned steadily, a beacon for others caught in similar storms. Sarah's journey was a testament to the resilience of a mother's love, a love that refused to be extinguished by time or tragedy, and that found expression in courage, compassion, and unwavering determination. The community of Willow Creek, too, began to heal, its wounds slowly knitting together through renewed awareness and a commitment to protect its most vulnerable members. New programs were established, collaborations between local authorities and non-profits flourished, and the echoes of silence that once blanketed the town gave way to voices raised in solidarity and hope. As Sarah looked toward the future, she embraced a cautious optimism, knowing that while some mysteries might never be fully resolved, the legacy she would leave was one of light piercing through darkness and change born from sorrow. Her story, intertwined with that of Ethan and countless others, stood as a powerful reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, hope could be rekindled, and with it, the promise of a safer, more compassionate world. In her resolve, Sarah carried not only the memory of her son, but the dreams of families yet to find their missing children, becoming a living testament to the enduring strength of love, the pursuit of justice, and the belief that no one should ever be forgotten.